Good evening, I'm Ces Oreña-Drilon.
I'm Pauline Verzosa.
And I'm Shawn Yao.
The big stories tonight. Driving nightmares are made of these, at least for motorists on EDSA and its side streets. Transport officials bring back the NCAP and odd-even to coexist with other coding schemes ahead of the EDSA rebuild project.
Out of the ASEAN summit in Malaysia, President Bongbong Marcos renews his call for a binding code of conduct in the South China Sea. He and his fellow leaders also aim to come up with a common stand on the reciprocal tariffs of Trump's America.
Speaking of President Bongbong Marcos, his numbers in a recent survey are way down. Compared to his vice president and predecessor, Marcos Jr.'s net trust rating is now in the negative.
Wala po kami sa business ng panghuhuli.
Medyo hassle din talaga pag mag-commute ka.
Kung talagang kailangan, di magtiis.
The MMDA records hundreds of violators on day one of the no-contact apprehension policy. But the jury is still out on how effective NCAP will be in managing congestion when the EDSA rebuild finally begins. Transport officials are looking for ways to make the makeover less painful through schemes that motorists find, well, just as cumbersome. Here's tonight's big story.
This is what EDSA Rush Hour looked like on Monday. Unlike before, there's fewer or almost no enforcers on the road. Those who did show up said they were only there to assist.
Napansin po natin na medyo marami mga motorista, especially mga nakamotor na umiwas po sa bike lane. Siguro gawa na rin po ng handcuff nga po natin. And then yung sa mga situation naman, yung challenges natin yan. So far, kailangan natin mag-visibility sa area para makapag-assist tayo ng maayos sa mga motorista.
As of 4 p.m. May 26, MMDA estimated the number of violators of the No Contact Apprehension Policy, or NCAP, at almost 600. These motorists will receive citation tickets via their registered mail. MMDA is still working with telcos so violators could be advised via text as well. The agency is also working on fixing the app where motorists can immediately check for violations. The MMDA defends NCAP again as a mere money-making venture.
Wala po kami sa business ng panghuhuli. Ang panghuhuli po namin ay para po sa disiplina ng ating mga kababayan na dapat po sumunod sila sa traffic rules for safety and para po walang chaos sa kalsada.
Aside from NCAP's restart, the MMDA also announced the comeback of the odd-even scheme, which will be implemented 24/7. Vehicles with plates ending in 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9 would be prohibited on EDSA on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, while those whose plates end in 0 and even numbers 2, 4, 6, and 8 are banned on the major thoroughfare every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. There will be no restrictions on Sundays, while electric and hybrid vehicles are exempted from the scheme, which will have a one-week dry run that starts on June 16. There are no fines yet during the trial run.
Ito po ay limited sa EDSA lamang. So sa EDSA lamang po tayo magkakaroon ng odd-even scheme. Ito po ay ginagawa natin dahil expected po na with this scheme ay magkakaroon po ng 40% reduction ng vehicle sa EDSA. Roads, aside from EDSA, kung ano po yung number coding scheme sa ngayon, yun pa rin po yung mag-govern.
Already, motorists have qualms over the odd-even scheme.
Yung isa kasi hirap din no? Kasi mayayaman talaga. Pwede ang resolution lang, bibili ng bagong kotse.
Medyo hassle din talaga pag mag-commute ka kasi magastos. Tapos mainit.
Meantime, the DOTR is still negotiating with San Miguel Corporation to allow free passage to parts of Skyway Stage 3, which will serve as an alternate route when the EDSA rebuild begins.
Ina-expect po natin na kung maglilibre uli yung Skyway, ay makaka-reduce po tayo ng between 10 to 20% volume sa EDSA. Kung sasamahan po yan ng odd-even scheme na additional 40%, ina-expect po natin na mas bibilis po yung daloy ng traffic at hindi po magkakaroon ng Carmageddon.
At the moment, EDSA busway is still fully operational, with DOTR even ordering additional 100 bus units to ply it on a regular basis. The Transportation Department is also looking at additional trains at the MRT and the removal of X-ray scanners in the train line so passengers can load quicker. When EDSA's major makeover kicks off on June 13, the first 2 weeks will be for preparation, where DPWH will preposition equipment and barriers. After that, excavations will begin. First to be affected will be the busway along the stretch of Pasay to Guadalupe and along Caloocan. Authorities hope the entire busway southbound will be done by end of year.
Pagka natapos natin itong rehabilitation ng EDSA, we can guarantee you that it will be a very smooth ride.
The 8.7 billion peso rehab of EDSA is expected to finish by 2027.
Meanwhile, members of the Move as One coalition went on a walking tour of EDSA today to show what else needs to be fixed along this major thoroughfare. And joining us via Zoom is Dr. Robert C. Jr., co-convener of Move as One coalition. Good evening and welcome to the Big Story. Tell us, how was the walk?
You know, Ces, first, thanks so much for inviting me to this show. It was hot, it was difficult, it was dangerous. I would say, you know, first of all, I really want to give my hats off to Secretary Vince Dizon for joining us on this walkthrough of EDSA. You don't see secretaries actually coming out and experiencing this this type of, you know, this type of walk.
What needs to be done? What did you discover?
You know, in almost every corner, the walk was treacherous. It's either you see potholes, you see cracks, you see areas where, you know, the sidewalk disappears, forcing the pedestrian to actually step into the carriageway. And so this is so dangerous, especially when you have not just a single file, but people moving in two directions on the sidewalk. So this is, in a way, it's really shameful that we have the most important corridor in the country where we have, you know, the most commercial activity, where we have perhaps the most densely populated residential areas, and you have a road that is unwalkable. So this really makes us what I would call car dependent. We are forcing Filipinos to go out and buy a motor vehicle and add to the traffic, the noise, the pollution, simply because we cannot provide an alternative like a good pedestrian walkway.
But now that EDSA is being rebuilt, it's not called a rehab anymore, but a rebuilding. And they're saying they want to build it more like a boulevard as opposed to a highway, which means more pedestrian-friendly spaces, still maintaining the bus lane as a priority for commuters. Are you happy, Sir Robert, with these proposed changes?
That would be a dream come true. This, you know, this is really what would change the character of Metro Manila and make it a more livable city. So can you imagine if, you know, instead of having this this decrepit, you know, pedestrian infrastructure, which is not even accessible for any person with disability, if we had instead a wide, safe walkway with shade, with greenery, under trees, you know, it would actually make EDSA, you know, so green and also so inviting.
But are you confident, Robert, that they can achieve this?
Well, you know, the real test is whether both MMDA and DPWH buy into the vision that Secretary Vince Dizon has put out for all of us. See, what Sec Vince has been talking about is this EDSA rehabilitation is like a once in a lifetime opportunity to actually redesign EDSA to make it people oriented instead of car oriented. You see, when Secretary Bonoan was describing what would happen, he said, "Oh, it will give everyone such a smooth ride." But again, his client is the motorist. His client is the person in a four-wheeled motor vehicle. But we know people who own cars are actually in a small minority. In Metro Manila, it's only about 11.5% of Filipino households in Metro Manila that own cars. The vast majority are actually people who use public transport, who walk, and who cycle.
Well, Dr. Robert, will you also be doing a walking tour at night? I understand you did one in the morning, but in the evening, that's when rush hour happens, when a lot
Mas
of people...
treacherous yan.
Opo.
Kasama ng human,
Yeah.
mga pickpocket or mga criminals.
Exposure to crime, yeah.
That would be terrific. And maybe if I can invite the three of you to join us. Actually, this morning.
Game. We're committing.
Yeah.
We'll do the show from there.
We had, several people from media with us. And that it was so important for us because it helps to get the message out about what we need to change. And like you said, so many people are actually on EDSA during the night. You know, how I got to the starting point, I took the EDSA busway at 4 in the morning. And to my surprise, because I'm actually very interested in improving bus services, at 4 a.m., the
Dami ng
bus
tao.
was standing room. The bus on the EDSA busway was already standing room. And that for me was a big surprise to see that many people already on EDSA that early in the morning. We need to actually make EDSA 24/7, safe, bright, clean, comfortable, convenient.
But Dr. Robert, though, there is a JICA study. This is even old data that we lose, 1.3, 1.4 billion pesos a day due to traffic. So in the meantime, before that dream is realized of a better EDSA, what happens then in the 2 years? We have NCAP, we have odd even on EDSA pending. And I just wanted to get your thoughts of what will happen in the meantime and how the economy could withstand that crazy traffic that we're imagining.
I think we all realize we need to look at low-hanging fruit and quick wins. And today, most of our investments in public transport are actually going into very large railway projects. Railways are still important, but they won't happen fast. We need to actually focus on road-based public transport. So these are buses, jeepneys, also even tricycles. We also need to look at what we call active transport. So this is walking and cycling and enabling people to actually walk and cycle instead of using a private motor vehicle.
Yeah, it's the best way, most environment-friendly way.
Exactly. And most of our trips are actually short distances, 3 kilometers or less. It is very much walkable or bikeable. But we need to create the safe spaces on our roads to enable people to go out. So it means having protection. It's not just paint. You need to actually have a barrier. In the case of also sidewalks or bike lanes, to the extent that we can create shade, that would make it so much more comfortable. And when we talk about climate change and actually fighting what we call the urban heat island effect, we need to actually create more shaded areas on our roads. So instead of cutting down trees, we need to actually go back to planting trees on our roads, on our sidewalks, make them shaded.
But Dr. Robert, well, what do you make of that timeline? Just 2 years to rebuild EDSA. And what should we be doing in the meantime? Kasi yung suggestion ng iba, tiisin na lang. But you know, the criticism there also is they didn't give motorists enough time to plan for these changes, such as the number or the odd-even coding scheme.
Okay, on the odd-even scheme, as a transport planner, for me, it's a self-defeating approach, because we know when you introduce something like that, number coding, people who can afford will go out and buy a second vehicle or a third vehicle. And once you have that vehicle, you will use it. And that will add more cars, more motorcycles on our roads. So this is a self-defeating approach. We need to look at other options. So basically, what can we do in the next 2 years? First, for public transport, wherever possible, we need to look at how we can put public transport on a dedicated lane, so our jeepneys and buses are not stuck in traffic. You know, I came back from a trip to Italy just recently, and my observation of a city like Milan, they have a dedicated lane for buses, but at the same time, they allow taxis and Uber to also use that dedicated lane. So you have a lane for buses, but it is not empty most of the time. You have other public transport vehicles able to use it. And we could apply that on many roads. Then, you know, creating sidewalks and bike lanes. That is not rocket science. You can build those in 12 months or less. So if we put our minds to it, even on EDSA, as part of the EDSA rehab, what I would really want to see or hope to see is one car lane width that is devoted to a sidewalk that is, in a way,
Wow, that's wide.
separated. One, you know, look, in most major cities,
That's
the main
true.
avenue, the main thoroughfare has a wide sidewalk.
Yeah.
We need something like that in order to attract one car lane wide. You can also put the bicycles there,
Yes.
and it will be a safe space for bicycles. And then the next priority would be the dedicated lane for the EDSA busway. We need to preserve that. And in order to raise capacity of the EDSA busway, at stations, you need what is called a passing lane. You need to enable some express buses to be able to overtake those that are loading and unloading at
So
station.
a wider busway.
A wider path for the buses around each station. And then the residual is what you would leave for private motor vehicles. And once we do that, once we prioritize what we call the efficient, sustainable, and inclusive transportation modes, then we will be encouraging people to shift away from using a motorcycle or a car, and instead they will adopt walking, cycling, or public transport in order to get to their destinations. And that is really the lasting, the durable solution to our pollution, traffic, and heat issues that we suffer today.
Okay. Any more questions?
I think.
All right. Well, did you give this all to the good Secretary Vince Dizon? Is he going to implement all of that?
We've given as much as we can, but the good thing is, Secretary Vince, he's very much engaged with civil society, and this is really what we appreciate.
Okay.
He talks to us, he listens to us, he asks us questions, And we're there to support him in this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and see you in our EDSA by night journey.
Okay,
That
Yes,
was Dr.
we're going
Robert
to-
C. Jr.,
We'll take you upon that.
co-convener of Move As One Coalition.
Right, moving on to another story. Net trust ratings of President Bongbong Marcos are now in the negative, or days before Bilang Pilipino 2025. Only 32% of respondents said they have big trust in the president, while 42% expressed small or no trust. With 27% saying they are unsure, these result in a net trust rating of -10 for Mr. Marcos. On the other hand, Vice President Sara Duterte and her father, former President Digong, were more trusted between May 6 and 9, or when the survey was conducted. 50% said they have big trust on the VP, while 25% had little or no trust, bringing her rating to +25%. Meanwhile, the former president earned the highest trust rating among the three with a net trust rating of +46. The Pulse Asia survey had 1,200 respondents and an error margin of ±2.8%. Now again, do note that these findings were before the conduct of the midterm elections and way before the so-called Great Cabinet revamp of the Marcos administration.
Let's have a quick chat with Pulse Asia President Ronald Holmes. Good evening to you, Ron, and welcome to the Big Story.
Good evening, Ces.
Bakit daw ngayon lang ang ratings when this was finished before the elections?
Well, it took quite some time for us to process the data. And then the other thing that we had to do was also, because part of the general report that we issued had to do with explaining the variance between the election survey and the actual results. We had to cull the data from the COMELEC. So this is not the only thing in that survey. So aside from the election data, we also have the trust ratings of the top two officials and the former president.
Not because you were protecting anybody from a big drop in ratings. That wasn't an issue.
Well, we saw a big drop already, Says, as early as March, if I remember, when Bongbong Marcos had 25% approval and trust, which is almost the same as what GMA had prior to the midterm. But in March, if you remember, he had a disapproval and distrust that was at the majority. Somehow his distrust has gone down to less than the majority from March 2025. But it's still quite a plurality, 4 out of 10 Filipinos.
Right. Also, something new in this survey, because you survey the approval ratings of our top officials, and we have a former president included here. What decision was behind? What made you decide to do that?
Well, we've done this before, where we had former President Estrada, former President GMA, and former President even the late Pinoy. We included in class ratings after their term. The main reason for that is that we wanted also to check the extent by which these personalities, who are still public figures to begin with, are still with substantial influence, or at least people would view them as trustworthy. In the case of the former president, of course, as social scientists, we need to find out essentially whether there's an erosion or a sustenance or even an increase in terms of the former president's trust rating. And we don't see that. We don't see that compared to the September survey, although his trust rating is higher than his daughter and even the sitting president right now.
Right. So this was commissioned or part of what you do on a periodic basis?
No, normally says this is part of the last survey that we do prior to an election, because when the survey that we publish is quite far from the election period, we do our own internal survey. We did this in 2022. We did it also in, if I'm not mistaken, in 2013, because the last survey that we conducted before this survey was 3 weeks before the election. So what we did was we conducted our own survey closer to election day. The main purpose is really to measure pre-election preference. But I think we also decided that it's important for us to gauge the trust rating of the top two officials, as well as a key personality that, if we can say, the rest of the former president did factor in terms of pre-election, in terms of shifts in votes or even the election results for that matter.
Okay, so did it I know this might be a long answer, Ronnie, no, but did it make you understand better why you got bakit malayo yung survey results sa binoto ng mga tao?
Well, definitely, the May survey allowed us to at least get a sense of what were the shifts that happened on election day. One of the key questions that we normally have in surveys that we do prior to election day and even in the exit poll is to ask people when did they firm up their decision on who to vote for. As the survey shows, about 1 out of 3 Filipinos are saying the day before the election or the day of the election itself. So that's quite significant. No? That's 30%, 33% of the voting population, which is quite higher than what we registered in 2022 when about 1 out of 5 said the day before election. So it would not be surprising that there are shifts. But the other thing that we saw really is that the variances and the changes are really things that affected both camps, no? The Alianza and the Duterte camp. We saw an overestimation of the Duterte support and erosion of the Mindanao. Meaning to say their machinery in Mindanao failed to sustain the levels of support registered in the survey because that's quite a significant drop. In the same manner, some Alianza candidates sustain their decline from 3 surveys prior to the May survey.
So mabuti na lang pala ginawa nyo to para may paliwanag.
Well, we normally do it. In 2022, we did not publish it, but in 2022, what we had then was Robin Padilla and Rafi Tulfo tied for first and second place. Eventually, Robin Padilla went up to first. I think Rafi Tulfo's lead to the third position. It was Lona Rigardo who got the second position then. So we do it for our own internal purposes, just to check. One of the functions of the survey, too expensive to do an exit poll, but one of the functions is really to see whether these survey results are far from the actual results. Of course, an exit poll would be better.
Right. And finally, to what would you attribute yung changing of the mind so close to election day? Is this usual or because of the uniqueness of the electoral contest this time?
I think it's partly the uniqueness of the electoral contest this time, the tension between the two prominent political families. As I said, for example, if you compare it to the result of the similar question we asked in 2022, when did they decide on who to vote for? 1 out of 5 Filipinos said the day before or the day itself of the election. In this survey, we see 1 out of 3 Filipinos saying the day before or the day of the election itself. So that in a sense is already quite significant. Why is there an increase? And then the other thing that we saw when we compared the survey results with the results of the actual elections, we saw really an increase in terms of support, although some are marginal, some are statistically significant. On the part of some independent and progressive candidates, you had Heidi Mendoza, Lucky Espiritu, the Makabayan candidates. So, initially we were looking at undervotes, but I think that's not an explanation for the results, because the undervotes remain as what we polled in the survey. If you look at the data, I think about 240 million undervotes divided by the total turnout. It comes out to about 4.22. So that's about 8 fill-up rates, almost the same as what we got in the survey. So what people did probably was to change the people that they were voting for. And that's where we see a shift. And there were 2 candidates that did not see any erosion in so far as their support. Others fell, but 2 candidates had plausible increases, That's Bam Aquino and Kiko Pangilinan. And that will explain why their ranks are higher.
All right, well, we thank you so much for joining the Big Story. Pulse Asia President Ronald Holmes.
In other news, agriculture officials were in Bulacan today amid complaints from farmers there that they are being shortchanged. In some parts of the province, the price of 1 kilo of palay went down to as low as 11 pesos and 50 centavos. Farmers pegged the correct price for their products at 19 pesos a kilo. Because of this, Secretary Francisco Tiu Laurel says the Agriculture Department is seriously considering setting a floor price for palay before the next harvest season.
In the rule of yung tinatawag na supply and demand, kung maraming demand, dapat mas mataas ang presyo. So, ibig sabihin sa naririnig ko sa sinasabi mo, nag-uusap-usap yung mga loko ngayon. Naghahanap kami ng legal avenues, no, para ma-implement ito if possible. Kailangan din yung lahat ng retailers at traders ay kailangan by law is mag-register sa NFA para nga natin makontrol lahat sila. Bulag kami sa NFA kung sino-sino mga ito eh. No, parang it's a cat and mouse game eh, kasi by law hindi na required. So kailangan yun na yung regulatory powers ng NFA kailangan may balik.
We're just gonna take a quick break, but coming up, President Marcos already has a pick for the next Philippine National Police Chief. The DILG has given a few hints. Find out when the big story returns. Stay tuned.
You're watching The Big Story here on One News. Philippine National Police Chief Romel Marbil will finally get to retire. DILG Secretary John Vic Remulla says President Marcos now has a potential PNP head. Marbil was supposed to retire last February, but his term was extended for another 4 months because of the elections. Remulla, however, did not disclose who Marbil's replacement is, deferring to President Marcos to make the announcement.
But PNP Public Information Office Chief Colonel Randolph Tuanyo earlier disclosed the following as qualified contenders. These are Lieutenant General Jose Melencio Nartates Jr., Deputy Chief for Administration of the PNP, Lieutenant General Robert Rodriguez, Deputy Chief for Operations, Lieutenant General Edgar Alan Ocubo, Chief of the Directorial Staff, Police Major General Nicolas Torre III, Chief of the CIDG or Criminal Investigation and Detection Group, and Police Major General Anthony Aberin, Chief of the National Capital Region Police Office.
Wala. It's his choice. Nag-usap na kami and may napupusuan na siya. Pero hindi na lang natin ang announcement niya. Basta general and above, honest, good track record, firm grasp on police matters, and a good vision for the PNP.
Secretary Remulla also ordered the police force to do its job and make people feel safer. This follows President Marcos's directive to intensify police visibility around the country.
Hindi na sapat yung mga report nila ng mga crime solution. Ang tao ang importante ngayon. Dapat maramdaman nila na banayag ang kalye, ang anak nila pwede pumasok, uuwi ng maayos. Ang mga nagtatrabaho pag alis, uuwi na maayos.
The DILG will also be making a formal request to the International Criminal Court to allow former President Rodrigo Duterte to take his oath as mayor of Davao City. Secretary Remulla says the government recognizes Digong's win despite his detention in the Netherlands for crimes against humanity.
Yung gagawin ko na lang ay magpapaalam ako sa international sa ICC kung pwede pumunta ang consul natin para makapag-oath siya. Kasi kailangan mag-oath siya to assume office eh. So, in his absence, the Vice Mayor will be there. Pero ang number one concern namin makapag-oath siya as Mayor.
Meanwhile, on the first day of the 46th ASEAN Summit in Malaysia, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has once again pushed for the urgent adoption of a legally binding code of conduct in the South China Sea. President Marcos made the call during a plenary session where he reiterated its importance in safeguarding maritime rights and promoting stability in the hotly contested waters. According to the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Philippines is aiming for the finalization of the Code of Conduct by 2026 when it hosts the summit again.
We underscore the urgent need to accelerate the adoption of a legally binding Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. This is to safeguard maritime rights, promote stability and prevent miscalculations at sea. We commend Malaysia's leadership in convening the special ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting and welcome the consensus to avoid retaliatory measures.
Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim meanwhile announced in the summit that he has written U.S. President Donald Trump for a meeting with ASEAN members. The meeting will center on Washington's sweeping new tariffs and alleviate its impact on Southeast Asian nations.
I've taken the liberty also to write to President Donald J. Trump to seek his understanding to organize a U.S.-ASEAN meeting, which means we observe seriously the spirit of centrality. It speaks not only to our aspirations, but to our obligations.
We have lots of issues to talk about with our next guest tonight. Welcome back to The Big Story, geopolitical analyst Richard Haydarian. Good evening, Richard. Well, the Pulse Asia just released its internal survey, which it took before the elections. What do you make of, well, still low approval ratings of the president, although slightly recovered from, was that in March?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm glad that our good friend Professor Holmes clarified that there is a logical explanation why the final survey was quite different from the result, because there was another survey that apparently was much closer to the election day, and that was a bit more accurate. And katulad na nakita natin sa ibang surveys, up to a third, apparently, not only up to a fifth of our voters decided on the election day or just before election day. So that in itself perhaps explains some significant deviations that we have seen in the final survey. But speaking of the approval or trust rating of the president, I think we have seen already a downward spiral in his numbers for quite some time. And clearly we can see here na nung nagwatak-watak yung unity team, President BBM basically lost the Duterte base, right? In fact, it turned against him, while at the same time, it looks like he has struggled to win over those who are non-aligned or belong to the more liberal or opposition, genuine opposition side. So that may explain why his numbers are like that. But in my opinion, what's even more surprising, or rather interesting, I would say not surprising actually, is former President Rodrigo Duterte not only winning by a landslide in Davao, but also winning by a landslide in terms of trust rating among all top leaders in the country, even if everyone expects him to spend the rest of his life in the detention based on proper analysis of the legal cases against him. So I think that for me is even more interesting to look at. Former President Duterte having higher approval than both his daughter, Vice President Sara Duterte, and significantly more than the current president. So that for me is the interesting part.
Okay, well, exactly why is it important? Do you think leading up to 2028, where everyone's already focused on, even though it's only 2025, do you think those high approval ratings of former President Digong would actually impact, all the players come 2028 and how they go about their candidacies?
Well, I mean, obviously what we see right now is yung resilience of the Duterte base. I think what happened was that the Duterte base went down to around 10, 15, or 20%. And then after the ICC arrest of former President Duterte, you had a full consolidation of the traditional sympathetic support base, and that was around 30 to 40% of the population. That was more or less the 16 million votes that Duterte won. And then, of course, over time, they had some gains here and there. And that may explain why Bongo and Bato was number 2 almost, right? Very close siya kay Bam Aquino. If you look at it, it perfectly makes sense that a significant plurality of our population has a huge support base. Now, if we were a parliamentary system a la Germany or even a la Britain, they would have been already the leading political party. So even if they're not the majority, they're significant plurality. I would say that the Duterte base in a parliamentary system would have given them essentially the prerogative to form the government. So that tells you how strong that base is and how resilient that base is, and if anything, how crystallized that base has become since the arrest of former President Duterte. Obviously, the moment that President BBM made the decision to give a go-ahead signal to the ICC, I think it was a big mistake on his part to think that he could just, do it and then let's forget about it and move on and hope that the machinery of the state will carry the Alianza. Apparently, that's not what happened. He was already struggling with a lot of criticism of the so-called ayuda, of all the supposed, leveraging of the national budget for electioneering allegations coming from the liberal opposition. And then after the ICC warrant of arrest, I don't think the president made a very strong case to justify to the majority of Filipino people why the former president had to be taken to the ICC. Was there a significant effort to, for instance, shed light dun sa mga kwento ng mga biktima ng extrajudicial killings? Was there a return to the story of Kian de los Santos and thousands of others that we haven't heard enough about? I didn't see any follow-through. I think the president wanted a soft landing, and he didn't get that soft landing because both the liberal opposition and the Duterte opposition were very, very trenchant in terms of their criticism of the president. And at the end of the day, that may explain the significant underperformance of the administration and the overperformance of many Duterte-aligned and even liberal opposition-aligned candidates.
And now it brings us to a cabinet revamp. Do you think this is enough to help his struggling numbers, to get him to recover some of that? And how can he, quote-unquote, weaponize this revamp, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, okay, I was just listening to the press conference kanina, and my understanding is that there'll be more announcements soon. Pero ang problema ko dito is that this cabinet revamp, reboot, whatever you want to call it, it could come off as performative or theatrics if basically there's no significant change in the core members of the cabinet. I mean, if the president's argument is we underperform in midterm elections dahil ang concern ng tao ay, I don't know, welfare issue, gut issue, food issue, then how come his economic managers are still the same, right? You would have imagined naturally there would be some changes in departments of, I don't know, national development, NEDA, formerly NEDA, or finance, or even agriculture for that matter, which perfectly makes sense, right? Because kamusta yung 20 peso kada kilo, diba? Aside from the pilot project they did in Visayas. So my sense is if he's going to keep his core economic managers, and the ones that he's going to change are like Department of Foreign Affairs, I'm not sure how that is exactly responding to the problem that he supposedly identified for the underperformance of his administration. I kind of disagree with his reading of the situation. I think the reading of the situation is that he had a weak campaign strategy. I think his team didn't do enough to defend the administration or themselves, and I think he didn't do enough to defend himself from the criticism from both sides. But if his reading is, ang tao ay ayon na sa amin or bumaba yung trust rating sa amin dahil hindi kami nagpa-perform dun sa fundamental welfare issue, and then hindi mo papalitan yung core economic managers mo, then I don't see the connect. I mean, I can see why the new DFA secretary is Testaza, because she has an Asia hand, and she's the perfect person to deal with ASEAN chairmanship of the Philippines next year, to deal with probably Xi Jinping coming to the Philippines next year. Yes, I get that, but I don't know how that makes sense in the context of the problem the president has supposedly identified. So let's see if in the coming days there will be a significant change in the relevant departments as far as welfare issues and other key issues for the Filipino people is concerned.
Okay, well, Richard, what about this move by DILG Secretary John Vic Remulla asking the ICC for an approval to bring home the former president for his oath-taking? Is this a sign of him just, trying to parang pakitang gilas because he could be replaced as a cabinet secretary? Or is this connected to the reconciliation efforts of Malacanang, of the president?
Well, I mean, this was basically a recognition of the endurance of President Duterte's support base. Basically, I mean, in Davao, it was a complete landslide for the president, and all the Dutertes did fantastic. I mean, even Rodrigo Duterte II topped the council, and Paulo Duterte, Polong and Baste, all of them did fantastic in Davao. So I think this is basically a concession and basically recognition that hindi namin maibalik na si Duterte sa Pilipinas. Medyo, I think, that's not how it works with ICC. But siguro we can symbolically at least recognize the support and authority still enjoys back in Davao, if not across the country. But then again, I mean, if the messaging of the president is reconciliation, and then this is the most they want to offer, I don't know, because clearly Senator Bongo, I think also Senator Bato to a certain degree said we need more significant gestures, extreme sincere gestures, if you really want reconciliation. Kaya nga, Just to be clear, I sarcastically or half-jokingly said, why not rehire Sara Duterte in your cabinet, right? If you're going to revamp it, right? I think she wanted DND before, you know, or get some more Duterte-aligned people into your cabinet if reconciliation is your messaging. But if that's not going to happen, and then the revamp is not really going to touch the core cabinet positions that are relevant to the issues that are relevant to the Filipino voters, then this is going to be more theatrics and performativity than substantive revamp.
Okay. A digong ally in the cabinet. Let's see if that will happen when the announcement is made this Wednesday. Thank you for talking to us, geopolitical analyst Richard Haydarian.
We're going to pause for another quick breather, but right after that, from election results, TV5 data whiz Edson Guido gives his take on the odd-even scheme that is set to make a comeback for the EDSA rebuild. His spot-on analysis when the big story returns. Keep it here.
The big story is back with news from disputed waters. It's all systems go for Atin Ito Coalition's third civilian mission to the West Philippine Sea. They're holding a concert, the first in WPS. The main ship, Kapitan Felix Oca, arrived in El Nido, Palawan today for the send-off. This vessel houses the stage where local and international artists will perform in the concert on Wednesday. Among the performers are Noel Cabangon, Ebe Dancel, P-pop group Horizon, and acts from Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, and South Korea. Despite the possibility of a water cannon attack from the Chinese Coast Guard, Atin Ito Coalition is determined to push through with the trip. The Philippine Coast Guard will deploy 2 ships to guard the civilian mission.
On a lighter and significantly different note, street racing has made its comeback after 7 years with the Toyota Gazoo Race Weekend 2. The high-speed event drew motorsport fans and racers alike to the specially built circuit in Cavite. Here's the story from Mobile Journal, Isa Abelio.
It was a high-adrenaline weekend in Cavite as Villar City transformed into a full-blown racetrack. That's for Toyota Gazoo Race Weekend 2, which brought the rush of speed and thrill of competition closer to Metro Manila. Racers and motorsport fans alike flocked to the city to witness an action-packed showcase, featuring sprint races on the specially built street circuit, marking Toyota Gazoo's first return to street racing in 7 years.
It has been 7 years since our last street circuit, and we think that it's high time to bring the grit back to the street, closer to the metro. We have been successful in bringing people from all over to watch our motorsports events, and we look forward to having more street events in the near future.
The circuit was a force to be reckoned with. Tighter turns, sharp corners, and narrow lanes. Every second counted. The track pushed drivers to their limits, demanding precision, focus, and speed behind the wheel.
Street circuits are unique because mainly they use public roads, and it provides a newer challenge for the drivers in terms of their adjustments and skill. And in this case, it's also interesting for the spectators as well to see these adjustments being made on the part of the racers.
Any street race is really exciting, no? Kasi it's a different environment than the usual speedway. And then yung mga barrier, katabi mo lang. It makes it more exciting.
It's quite exciting. It's a different racetrack. We are not quite used to a very tight racetrack, but it's very, very exciting.
I really love this new format that they're doing. It's very refreshing to have something new and something to look forward to.
Top racers battled it out across multiple heats throughout the weekend. As a culmination to the Toyota Gazoo Race Weekend 2, a full lineup of awards was given to racers that dominated their respective heats. That's for sprint races 3, 4, and 5 under novice, sporting, super sporting, and legacy classes. Special awards were also given to standout performers on the track. Off the track, spectators enjoyed a full festive atmosphere. There were live performances from OPM legends and interactive sponsor booths. Watch out for the next Toyota Gazoo race weekend by following Toyota Gazoo Race Philippines. Mobile journalist Isa Abelio, we are One News.
And for our big picture tonight, well, someone's doing the math for the odd-even scheme. News 5 election data whiz Edson Guido took to social media to explain it. The odd-even scheme will be in force along EDSA on top of the regular number coding elsewhere. Now, Guido shares a breakdown on how daily commute will be affected. Due to the odd-even scheme, some cars will now not be allowed on EDSA during their assigned days, plus their regular number coding day. Now, that means they may only use EDSA once during the weekday. Now, take plate numbers ending in 3, for example. They are not allowed on EDSA on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays due to odd-even scheme. And because of regular number coding, they're also not allowed on Tuesdays as well. The same goes for plate numbers ending in number 7. Guido shares that even if regular number coding schemes are removed, but retaining the odd-even scheme, there is still the number coding the moment you exit EDSA.
Deja vu.
Magta-traffic sa Sunday.
Lahat ng tao lalabas na lang
Diba?
sa Sunday.
Kasi
Oo nga.
pwede kong gamitin.
Huwag ka na lang, sa bahay ka na lang, huwag ka nang gumalaw.
But when you think about it that way, once a week ka nga lang pwede mag-EDSA.
Either that or walk, bike,
And try the bus carousel.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's it for the big story on this Monday evening. Oh, first day of the week.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thank you for watching. Have a good night.